I never imagined I'd wake up one morning to find my own home under siege. My career had been spent in courtrooms, presiding over high-stakes cases, unraveling elaborate frauds, and crushing those who thought they were above the law. But today, I wasn't standing behind the bench, delivering a verdict. I was standing in my own driveway, staring at a bright yellow notice plastered to my front door like a scarlet letter. The wind made the paper flutter, but the words were bold, unshakable, designed to intimidate. Violation notice. Beneath the massive heading was a list of infractions, each more ridiculous than the last. Grass exceeds allowable length. Improper mailbox placement. Unapproved exterior modifications. I felt my pulse quicken. This had to be a mistake. My lawn was immaculate, manicured weekly by the same landscaping service I'd used for 3 years. My mailbox was exactly where it had been when I bought the house. I hadn't modified anything. Not a single brick, not a single window. A fine of $850 was stamped at the bottom, with a deadline. 7 days to pay, or further enforcement actions will be taken. I gritted my teeth, already running through legal precedents in my mind. There was only one problem with this so-called violation. There was no HOA. At least, there hadn't been when I purchased the house 3 years ago. My wife Rebecca and I had specifically chosen this neighborhood because it was free of the power-hungry, fine-obsessed HOA boards that I had seen destroy families in court cases. Now, out of nowhere, I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the real estate agent who sold us the home. "David, this doesn't make sense," she said, her voice tight with confusion. "There was no active HOA when you bought that house. I checked every document before we closed. Then why am I being fined by one?" There was a pause, a hesitation. Then she muttered, "I don't know, but I'd be very careful. HOAs can be ruthless when they want something." I clenched my jaw. I'd spent decades taking down ruthless people. If they wanted to fight, they had no idea who they were up against. As I hung up, movement caught my eye. A black SUV, rolling slowly down my street. The windows were tinted, the driver barely visible, but the intent was clear. They were watching me. I turned sharply, locking eyes with the dark shape behind the wheel. They didn't stop, didn't wave, just took their time scanning my house, my driveway, my family's private space. A cold anger settled in my chest. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to bury them. I walked inside, but before I could even explain the situation to Rebecca, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice greeted me, sharp and practiced, like someone who enjoyed giving bad news. "Mr. Wallace, this is Evelyn Mercer, president of the Oak Haven HOA. I assume you've seen the notice on your door." Her tone was so smug, so casually condescending. I had to force myself to remain calm. "I saw it," I said evenly. "And I'd like to know what legal grounds you think you have to impose fines on a property that was never under an HOA agreement." She laughed softly, as if she'd heard this objection 1,000 times before. "Oh, Mr. Wallace," she said, like she was talking to a child. "The HOA was reinstated recently, and all homeowners in Oak Haven are now required to comply with community guidelines. Your property is within the enforcement zone, and non-compliance carries fines, as you can see." "That's not how the law works." "That's how our law works," she countered, her voice smooth, practiced. "I strongly suggest you pay your fines before we have to escalate the situation." "Escalate," I repeated, my mind already racing through the possibilities. She exhaled, annoyed. "Let's not make this difficult, Mr. Wallace. The board has the power to restrict certain privileges for homeowners in violation. You might find deliveries difficult. Utility services may experience delays. Mail might stop arriving. It's all in the enforcement policy we've provided." I felt my blood go cold. This wasn't just about a fine. This was coercion, extortion, under the guise of community rules. I kept my voice neutral. "I'll see what I can do." "Excellent," she said, far too satisfied. "We'll expect payment within 7 days." The call ended. I did not plan to pay a single dime. Instead, I sat down at my desk, pulled up my legal research tools and started digging. An hour later, I had my answer. The HOA didn't legally exist. There were no valid records of its reinstatement, no state-registered governing body, no official amendments filed to legally bind Oak Haven properties to its control. Evelyn Mercer was running a scam, and she had just targeted the wrong damn house. But before I could even begin to make my next move, a thick white envelope was slid under my door. No postage, no return address. I picked it up, ripped it open. Inside was a detailed invoice, not just for the fines, but for enforcement fees. The new total? $1,500. At the bottom, in fine print, a single line sent a chill through my spine. Failure to comply may result in physical enforcement actions, up to and including HOA-mandated property adjustments. Property adjustments? I barely had time to process it before my daughter, Mia, peeked around the corner. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Why was a man taking pictures of our house?" I felt my stomach drop. I rushed to the window, heart pounding, just in time to see the same black SUV from earlier slowly driving away. I turned back to my desk. This had just become personal. I wasn't just going to fight them. I was going to expose them. And when I was done, they would never threaten another family again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging outside. A strange, rhythmic noise that didn't belong in my neighborhood. I threw on a sweatshirt, walked to the front door, and as soon as I stepped outside, I froze. A steel fence had been erected overnight around my property. It was thick, industrial-grade metal, bolted into the pavement, stretching along my driveway, blocking my mailbox, even cutting off access to my backyard gate. It wasn't some flimsy HOA warning sign. It was a full-scale barricade, as if my home had been transformed into a prison yard. A new notice was zip-tied to the fence. Until outstanding fines are paid in full, this barrier will remain in place per HOA enforcement policy. My stomach twisted with fury. They fenced me in. They trapped my family inside our own home. I barely heard Rebecca run up behind me, her voice sharp with panic. "David, what the hell is this?" I didn't answer because I already knew. This wasn't just about fines anymore, this was punishment. The Oak Haven HOA had just made their biggest mistake. They thought I was just another homeowner. They had no idea who I really was. I turned toward the smug, uniformed men standing on the sidewalk. 3 of them, dressed in black polo shirts with the HOA's logo stitched neatly over their chests. One of them, a stocky man with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, grinned at me like I was some cornered animal. "Morning, Judge." His tone was mocking, casual, like he enjoyed this. "Bet it'd be real easy to get that fence removed if you just paid up." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If I lost control, I lost leverage. So instead, I studied him. Tattoos peeking out from his sleeves. The way he stood slightly turned, like a guy who'd been in more than a few fights. This wasn't a volunteer HOA enforcer. This was a hired thug. I met his smirk with a level stare. "Who gave you the authority to do this?" "The board," he shrugged. "All within the community guidelines." I stepped forward until I was inches from him. I wanted him to see me clearly, not just as a homeowner, as a judge. "Let me be very clear," I said, voice low, firm, controlled. "This fence? Illegal. These fines? Fraudulent. You and your little board just committed a felony." He hesitated, just for a second, just enough to tell me he wasn't used to being challenged. "You've got 7 days, Wallace," he muttered. "Then things escalate." Escalate? That's what you tell someone you're about to destroy. But they weren't going to destroy me. No, I was about to bury them. The isolation begins. It started almost immediately. By midday, I realized that I wasn't just physically fenced in. I was being cut off from the world. I tried ordering food. Every restaurant refused to deliver. I called FedEx. They couldn't reach my property due to HOA restrictions. Even Amazon, a company that delivers to remote deserts, suddenly couldn't find my address. And then the power flickered. Rebecca gasped. "David, what's happening?" I checked my phone. A new email from the HOA. Due to non-payment of fines, your property may experience temporary service interruptions. I had seen mafia tactics in my courtroom before, but never in a neighborhood. They weren't just pressuring me to pay. They were trying to make life unbearable. And the worst part? It was working. By the end of the day, I saw neighbors avoiding eye contact. People who used to wave, chat, now hurried inside when I walked out. I knew why. Evelyn Mercer had turned the entire neighborhood against me. She had spread a story, twisted reality just enough, until people believed I was some dangerous outlier. That night, as I sat in my office, buried in legal documents, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, expecting Evelyn. But the voice was distorted. Mechanical. "You're making a mistake," it said. "Walk away." Click. A slow, cold anger settled into my bones. I wasn't going to walk away. I was going to take them down. The breakthrough. At 1:42 a.m., sitting in the dim glow of my laptop, I finally found it. The missing link. It was buried deep in county records. But there it was. The Oak Haven HOA was legally dissolved 5 years ago. There was no board, no governing authority, no legal power. Evelyn Mercer was running a fraud. She had revived a non-existent HOA, enforced fake fines, and bullied homeowners into paying money they didn't owe. And worse, she wasn't doing it alone. I cross-checked her name with real estate filings and found something even bigger. Multiple homes in Oak Haven had been sold under suspicious circumstances. I pulled public records, traced them back to shell companies, and there it was. Evelyn owned those properties. She wasn't just extorting homeowners. She was forcing them out and flipping their homes for profit. I leaned back, breathing hard. This wasn't just an HOA power trip. This was a multi-million-dollar real estate scam. The war begins. At 6 a.m., I called a friend at the local news station. At 7 a.m., I filed an emergency injunction with the county court. At 8 a.m., I contacted a civil rights lawyer, someone who loved nothing more than tearing fraudulent HOAs apart. And at 9 a.m., I called Evelyn Mercer's office. She picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Wallace," she said, syrupy sweet. "Calling to settle your fines?" I smiled. "No. I'm calling to tell you that your time is up." A pause. Then, "Excuse me. You and your entire board have exactly 24 hours before this neighborhood becomes the center of a statewide criminal investigation." Silence. Then, for the first time ever, Evelyn sounded nervous. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said. I smiled. "No, Evelyn, you don't." I sat at my desk, staring at the evidence laid out in front of me. Every fraudulent fine, every illegal property transfer, every connection between Evelyn Mercer and the shell companies she used to steal homes. It was all there, mapped out in painstaking detail. My fingers tapped rhythmically against my desk, the gears in my mind turning, calculating my next move. I had spent my life tearing apart corrupt organizations in the courtroom. I knew how predators like Evelyn operated, how they buried their schemes under layers of bureaucracy, intimidation, and just enough legal gray areas to keep people afraid but powerless. But this time, she had picked the wrong target. I reached for my phone and made 3 calls. First, to a journalist I trusted, the kind who didn't just report stories. She destroyed careers. Second, to the state attorney's office. I laid out what I had found, and the reaction was instant. Third, to an old friend, one of the most relentless civil rights attorneys in the country. By noon, the wheels were already in motion. The war was officially on. The ambush, the HOA board meeting that changed everything. That evening, I received an anonymous tip. The HOA was holding an emergency board meeting, a secret gathering to discuss further actions against me. I knew exactly what that meant. They were desperate. They knew I was closing in, and this meeting? This was damage control. So, I did what any judge with a burning vendetta and a mountain of evidence would do. I crashed their meeting. It was held at the community center, a stuffy, beige-walled room where I had seen my neighbors gather for everything from birthday parties to town hall discussions. But tonight it was filled with snakes. Evelyn Mercer sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly, her expression icy calm. But I saw it. the way her fingers tensed, the way her eyes darted to the folder in my hands. She knew. The other board members flanked her like loyal guards, but their confidence wavered the second I stepped through the door. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I dropped the thick stack of documents onto the table with a satisfying thud. "This meeting is over." Silence. Evelyn laughed softly. "You're not a member of this board, Mr. Wallace." I took a step closer. "No, but I am the man who's about to dismantle everything you've built." The room tensed. I opened the folder, flipping through pages as I spoke. "You've been running a fraudulent HOA for years. You have no legal authority over this neighborhood, but you've been collecting fines, seizing homes, and selling them through a series of shell companies. And the best part," I looked up, my smile sharp as a blade, "I can prove all of it." One of the board members, a balding man with thick glasses, coughed nervously. "That's a serious accusation, Judge Wallace." I slid a document across the table. "This is the official state record showing that the Oak Haven HOA was legally dissolved 5 years ago. Meaning, every action you've taken since then? Completely illegal. Every fine, every foreclosure, every rule you enforced? Void." The color drained from Evelyn's face. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out another stack of papers, bank records, real estate transactions tied directly to her. "You've personally profited off every home you stole. You've intimidated, blackmailed, and harassed families out of their homes to feed your scam. But that ends now, because I've already filed an injunction with the court." Evelyn's smile vanished. I leaned in. "By this time tomorrow, not only will your HOA be legally barred from taking any further action against homeowners, but the state attorney's office will be investigating you for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." She tried to keep her composure, but I could see it. The cracks forming, the panic behind her eyes. One of the board members stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I had no idea," he stammered. "I was just following." Evelyn shot him a glare so sharp it could have drawn blood. But it was too late. They were turning on each other. I straightened my tie, enjoying the chaos. Then, right on cue, the doors swung open. 3 uniformed officers walked in. Detective Larson, an officer I had known for years, stepped forward, holding up an arrest warrant. "Evelyn Mercer," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "You are under arrest for fraud, illegal property enforcement, and conspiracy to commit extortion." The room exploded. Board members scrambled, whispering, denying involvement. "But Evelyn," she snapped. "You can't do this," she shrieked as Larson cuffed her. "This is a private organization." "Not according to the state," I said smoothly. "As of today, the Oak Haven HOA no longer exists." The click of handcuffs was music to my ears. The fallout, taking back my home. 2 days later, the fences came down. One by one, the barricades that trapped my family, that turned my home into a prison, were torn apart. I stood on my driveway, arms crossed, watching the HOA's hired thugs scramble to dismantle the very barriers they had erected. Neighbors began coming out of their homes, watching, whispering. Then the whispers turned into cheers. A woman from down the street, someone who had once avoided eye contact, walked up, tentative. "Judge Wallace, thank you." I turned, meeting her gaze. "For what?" "For standing up for us. For stopping them." I looked past her, at the people watching, at the relief on their faces. And I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. I had taken down a system that had been preying on innocent families for years. That night, I sat with Rebecca and the kids on the porch, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Because this was our home. And no one, not Evelyn, not any corrupt HOA, no one was ever going to take it from us again.